My name is Maurice Guibard. My family is originally from France, from smack in the middle of France. Back in the 1650s is when we arrived, set up shop in Trois-Rivières. My family moved, my branch of the family moved to the Ottawa area 150 years ago, and I've been, grew up in Ottawa, but then spent 10 years in Calgary and 33 years now in Vancouver. All right, I'm a translator, an archaeologist, a historian, a museologist, and an educator. So, and I'm also the executive director of the Société, historique francophone de la Colombie-Britannique, of which the mandate is to gather, preserve, and disseminate the history of Francophones in BC, which is an understated history, right? We're very often on page 16, right? But we are in almost every history book in BC. So we have our office and archives and collection in La Maison de la Francophonie, the Francophone Center, which is on West 7th. And we're very busy and in doing something that is close to our hearts. So here we go. In 2019, the SHFCB received a grant from Digital Museums Canada to undertake a fascinating project. We were to launch on-site research in the Cariboo and the Okanagan on the history of Francophone ranchers in those regions during the 1860s and 70s, to conduct oral history interviews with the descendants of the original families, and to create a digital exhibition that would be available online, free to all, in both official languages on the site of Digital Museums Canada. And everything was running smoothly, and then COVID hit, right? So that's why it became a 5-year project, because this brought visits and interviews to an abrupt stop to begin anew after the pandemic. Now, historian Jean Barman had already conducted research and had meetings with the families in these areas. I was to go beyond the first generation in order to highlight not only the founding families, but also to discover the importance of the paths of their descendants in scores of important fields in BC. And that's what you're going to see today. Now, the 8 families that, so this is the area basically that we were involved in, from around here to Williams Lake, including Kelowna. Okay, so that's where we were going. These are the families that I focused on, and in alphabetical order, Boucherie, and I'm using the French pronunciations. At this point, the names are pronounced differently now. Boucherie, Guichon, Isnardy, Lequim, Miniberriet, Patenaude, Pigeon, and Versepuech or Gaspard. Now, these are not the only Francophones to have established ranches in the province's interior, but since the platform used was for a digital exhibition, the number of pages is limited. It's that simple. So in the long run, the digital exhibition concept, as great as it was for us to pull together new research and information, be able to put it online and available to all, it still proved to be frustrating as it severely limited the amount of detail I could insert. And Jolene will know she's probably got 200 pages on the one aspect of her family, and you saw 2 slides of that, right? That's the reality of historical presentation. But it's only through presentations such as this one that I can elaborate further on historical details that had until now never been presented publicly. So you're one of the first publics to hear it in English. We did get another grant. The federal government saw the importance of what we are doing in today's context, and you will understand why. And they actually said, submit for this grant, and we did get it, and it will send me around the province to present in French and in English to communities in every part of the country, as well as to First Nations and Métis communities that want to hear about it. So that's very exciting, except for landslides and fires, you know? So I must stress, like Jolene did, that the history of ranchers in the province is totally one of colonialism, of the establishment of businesses and industries, that villages and towns on lands appropriated from the First Nations. You will see how the Indigenous members of these families made their place, either then or more recently, in the historical fabric in which we now live. It is also these families from which I have received the directive to spread these historical facts that I've been able to discover during our meetings. It is critical that this be made clear so that this presentation, and indeed the exhibition itself, does not slide on the slope of cultural appropriation. Now, for those of you who have not been to the Calgary-Chilcotin, go. It is a spectacular landscape, it is historical landscape, and it is a very welcoming landscape. It's just spectacular. I enjoy going there all the time. Now, for those, so time does not allow me to present on each of the 8 families, so I've limited the presentation to 4 of them. The first is that of Amédée Isnardy, originally from Nice. You can see in the southeast of France there. Like many of the men in my research, he first made his way to the California Gold Rush, which took place from 1848 to 58. Very few are the gold rushes that last even a decade, and he followed tens of thousands of gold prospectors from the States, some of them from around the world, to the Fraser Gold Rush, which was 1858. All right. Now, a few years later, it was followed in turn by the Cariboo Gold Rush. So we had about 6 gold rushes, some larger than others, and the Cariboo Gold Rush, where all those who had stuck it out made their way as well. So like most of the men in this human wave, Amédée married a native woman, Julienne Waila Malqua. So there's her native name, First Nations name, and her baptized name. Her father was chief of the Stadtleum nation, also known as the Pemberton Nation, Lillooet Band, Interior Salish people, or Stadtleum Lillooet. No photo exists of either one from that couple, and fairly common for the period, even more so for First Nations women. In this case, we have the rare occurrence where we know both her indigenous name and her baptismal name. The First Nations woman was often baptized just prior to her wedding and was always given a European name in French or in English, depending on the priest, right, or the minister. But it's quite rare that the indigenous name appears in baptismal records because it was seldom deemed of any consequence, right? Cultural eradication continued right up to the altar. Now, the couple had 11 children. Who's had 11 children here? Yeah, 11 cats and dogs maybe, and they established their ranch at Chimney Creek on the Fraser, southeast of Williams Lake. We know that French was not spoken in the home, interestingly enough, but that the children spoke English as well as a bit of Shuswap. So what happened to the French? During that period, most of the colonizers gave in to the aspiration of the British Crown on the West Coast. So they attempted to meld into the English mold. So what about the children of this mixed ancestry? Many would have immediately referred to them as half-breed, horrible word, since the term Métis was at that time not applied west of the Rockies, except in a few small areas where descendants of prairie Métis had established themselves. Kelly Lake, for example, just this side of the Rockies, just west of, in between Banff and Jasper. So if a child's skin was lighter, he or she could pass as a white person, which was often sought after. You not only needed to anglicize yourself, you needed to bleach yourself. Now, one of their sons was Jimmy Isnardy. Sorry, here's a photo of the children of the second Isnardy marriage, and my informant was on the right, and you'll see a more recent photo, and you can tell they have different skin tones, right? And some of them to this day negate their First Nations heritage, which is interesting, whereas my source is a signed-up member of the local First Nations band, right? So how did that happen, right? So I asked him, well, did your family become Métis? He said, no, there was no such thing. And I said, so why not? He says, because we weren't supposed to. We were supposed to be white and English. And I said, so when did you become Métis? And he said, well, when it was the time, when it was sort of encouraged by the federal government, you know, where we could educate our children if we were Métis. So we took advantage of those things for the sake of our children. I said, so you're Métis? He says, no, no, I'm First Nations. I said, so you joined the band? He said, yes, it's wide open. He says, but the Métis Nation of Association of the Cariboo has 6,000 members, right? So I said, your children then are First Nations? He says, no, they're Métis. All right? And their children, he says, they won't be either because there's the percentage of blood involved. That is that roller coaster of cultural lineage in BC for these families. Now, it's in this framework that I discovered that Jimmy Isnardy on the right became a champion fiddler in BC. Whatever might have been the culture of the period's musicians. So much so that the museum, Royal BC Museum now holds an oral history recording with him in his senior years in which he plays several tunes on his fiddle, which I would have loved to play for you, but at that point it cost a fortune to be able to tape and use, and only 2 months after the project was done, they finally withdrew those fees, so it's too bad I don't have that. But again, here we have a man we could qualify as Métis, but who excelled in playing the playing of a European musical instrument, right? The violin, or fiddle, in fact, transcended cultures like no other instrument on the West Coast. Now, with the Isnardys, as well as many of these families, war heroes are not uncommon. During recruitment during the 2 world wars, First Nations men jostled their way to sign up in order to prove their valor as Canadians. It's nice to know that in most cases they were treated equally among the battalions and divisions. The same thing did not occur when they returned, right? It was still back to, and this is William Isnardy, one of the descendants, and he was killed during the First World War. That's the telegraph that informed the family that he was wounded, and he died of that wound. And this beautiful medal, which is the World War I commemorative medal, and his name is embossed here. Every person who died, who served with the British services during the First World War, if he or she died, their family received this medal, and it became known as the dead man's penny, right? Now, it's a sport of rodeo rooted amid the workers of all of these ranches that I found, where I found many members of my families, including Mike Isnardy. His photo is blurry there, but there he is. His competition prizes now grace the galleries of the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Williams Lake. It's a slice to go see that museum. It's really nicely done, and it's rich. Even today, these families remain closely tied to rodeoing. I even got a taste of it in Williams Lake the day after interviewing the Isnardys, and they told me there were 4-H competitions at the rodeo ground. So I went, and they introduced me to, you know, this person and that. And sadly, that day was the hog contest. You know, but they were very, very proud to introduce me to their nephew and niece, who were participating with their pet hog, right, in that competition. I thought, wow, that's, again, a slice of life. Now, the second family I wish to present to you is Joseph-Philippe Patenaude, JP, from La Chute, Quebec, just near Montreal. And it was while driving in Williams Lake that I noticed I was driving on Patenaude Street, or Patenaude Street, right? Which took me into some rich BC history. Now, Joseph-Philippe, or JP, arrived in the Cariboo in 1892, where he established the Wood Jam Ranch and the 153-mile ranch just south of Williams Lake. So 153 mile. So that's 153 miles north of Yale, right? That's how you gauge all those X-mile names. And he also became a Justice of the Peace. So he was JP for Joseph Philippe and Justice of the Peace, and he played on that all the time. And you can tell here this is a European family, right? You take a look at them, right? And they're fairly wealthy. And he married Christina Catherine Anderson from Ontario, and they had 6 children, and his second wife was Maria Henriette Bradshaw from Quebec, who gave him 1 son. So this is one family that did not visibly mix First Nations blood in its line, but according to Roger Patenaude, my principal contact in the family, and whose family still holds the main Patenaude Ranch. These are photos of some of the heritage buildings there. He said, if anyone in the Cariboo thinks they do not have native blood running in their veins, they must disabuse themselves of that belief. And to a degree, the same applies to Mexican blood, because so many Mexican men were brought in as ranch hands to the degree where it changed some of the apparatus linked to riding and steering and dealing with the animals. And Roger also insists that the best ranch hands were First Nations men, since they knew and respected the land. Now, the Patenaude Ranch is at Horsefly. Take a wild guess why that town has that name. I'm not moving there for any money. And it's the ranch in BC that has the largest remaining collection of heritage buildings that are still used. Right? So you've got about a dozen buildings there. The building at the bottom is a huge 2-story general store that the family operated for over 100 years. And they're trying to donate it to Williams Lake it's got about at least 5,000 to 10,000 artifacts inside it that go over 100 years, right? If it didn't sell, it went to the attic, including fabulous First Nations artifacts, etc. And it's not as simple to donate that. And where you're going to put it, they said, well, we bought a plot of land on where the Williams Lake Stampede rodeo is held, and you can move it there. But the First Nations, I don't know, from here to there, have found since the ruins of what do you call the underground dwellings? A pit house, and they are not comfortable with having a colonial building beside the ruins of their old house. So this will probably be moved to right beside the Cowboy Hall of Fame. But it took 3 years to get there, right? Now, among the descendants of this family, we have Edgar Arnold Rusty. What color was his hair? He's a redhead. Patenaude, who played with the Edmonton Oilers. There are 2 hockey cards from our collection. And he was invited back to Edmonton along with Gretzky for the opening of the present NHL arena in that city. He held the records that Gretzky finally broke, right? Sadly, his skill at the game also caused his body irreparable damage. There he is seated, and Roger behind him. And this is in the ranch house of Rusty's ranch. Then we have their aunt, Branwyn Patenaude, to whom we owe 6 volumes of the history of the Cariboo. So she was a historian. And for his part, on the right, a really bad photo in his senior years of Hope Patenaude, Rusty's uncle, who was the first operator of the Dominion government telegraph between Vancouver and Dawson City, a position he held for 47 years. So that's a slice of history right there, right? Now, the family of Jeff Patenaude, Rusty's cousin, and I interviewed Jeff as well, gave to the province a father and 4 children who created beautiful music. So from the left we have Seal Patenaude, beside her Marin, on the extreme right Ferris Romero, and Ferris's husband Jason Romero. Ferris and Jason have won 2 Junos, right? The highest musical award of the country for traditional roots music. And they grew up in Horsefly. You see, so this is all descendants from one small ranching family. My next family is that of Antoine Miniberriet, just a mouthful even for francophones, from Lecumberri, again southwest, again in the French Basque, and he was definitely Basque, after having raised cattle in Oregon. So where did cattle come from? Some men, rather than do the gold fields once they got there, they raised cattle. And there were also cattle drives from the south into BC, mostly for food, but probably some of them landed as cattle, breeding cattle, right? So he came north and established the Basque Ranch on the Thompson River between 100 Mile House and Spence's Bridge. It's one of the oldest ranches in BC, and it's still in operation, though no longer with the Miniberriet family. In 1867, he married Lestat, also known as Mary Lester, so you know which is their First Nations name, of the local Pukaist band. And together they had one son, very nobly named Louis Globe Miniberriet, Globe. And even though they did not speak French on the ranch, Globe learned the Inklakatmu language from his maternal grandmother, who also taught him how to trap and prepare hides and make moccasins. But several years later, the lives of Globe and his mother were to change dramatically. In 1873, his father did what many colonizers in BC did, whatever language they spoke, whatever country they originated from. He abandoned his Métis family to marry his real wife, right? And this is this European woman, Marie-Agnès Mathilde Delattre, born in New York City of French parents. How they met, we do not know. Louis Globe and Lestat were packed off to live on another of Miniberriet's properties, some 12 kilometers north of the Basque Ranch, and in moved Marie-Agnès, and they had 3 children there. But there's the house in Lecumberri, to which the European family moved back to in Lecumberri. And how did he manage that? Joanne was saying, did they have gold? Yes, they found gold on that ranch on top of all. Really a lot of gold. He became a wealthy man. But before leaving for France, and we do not have a photo of Lestat nor of Globe. Before leaving for France, Antoine did something for his son that was completely out of the norm for the period. He registered Louis Globe in carpentry and blacksmithing training at the Coqualitza Residential School in the Fraser Valley so that he could support his mother and his own eventual family after the father's departure, right? Even though Amédée had inflicted a brutal abandonment on that first family, he at least made this honorable gesture for which Louis Globe's family, those I interviewed, remain very grateful today. And they tend to be understanding of what happened back then because it happened all over the place. Now, Antoine was one of numerous European men, and this is back to Antoine here, who once installed in Canada also passed themselves off as being of the nobility. All right? So he often stated that he was a count. Count Miniberriet, much like Isidore Versepuech in Dog Creek, where another one of my families, and everywhere you look up Versepuech, it's Count Isidore Versepuech de Gaspard. Now my research with peerage experts in France indicates that neither one could make any claims to that noble title, any noble title, since they left their country due to their family's lack of social standing or due to the lack of inheritance prospects. It is interesting to note that they then tried to augment their status by padding their lineage with an imagined title. And they weren't the only ones that did it. It was common. This was not rare. Whatever their country of origin, an invented title could possibly open doors in the new land, elevating them above their true station, right? Now, among the descendants of Antoine and Lestat, we find on the right Percy Miniberriet. The spelling has changed. Champion calf roper in the rodeo circuit. And there he is at the P&E Rodeo in 1952. He's also in the Rodeo Hall of Fame, the Cowboy Hall of Fame. We also discovered to the left, wearing the crown, young Verna Miniberriet, who was crowned BC Indian Princess in 1975. The contest started in '64. Most of us have heard of the Miss BC pageant, right? Which seems to be fairly recent and possibly died out during the pandemic, because I haven't seen any mention of it since. And to compare that, the Miss Canada pageant dates from 1946 to 1992. These die out for reasons we know, right? So these Miss X pageants would highlight the crowning of a young and usually pretty white woman who would then go on to national and eventually world pageants. Young Indigenous women, however, were excluded from these pageants and redirected to parallel Indigenous pageants, all right? And I've just read about a national Indigenous pageant now that's back on, because in this case, Verna was the last to wear the BC crown, because that's the year 1975 when that contest was ended. You know, women's lib was coming, right? Right? So for her part, what happened to Verna, she got a doctorate in education. She became a researcher and leader in her field in BC, devoting her life to the bettering of education in First Nations communities. Hats off, right? Now, the last family I'm going to talk to you about, and Jolene touched upon it absolutely, was the Guichon. Guichon family, now known as Guichon. And they were from Chambéry in Savoie, in the skiing region. They married sisters Perron. So there's Laurent and Joseph. Two other brothers came. One died. One went back to France to get married and stayed there. And they married Perron and Josephine Rey, R-E-Y, daughters of a rancher at Mamette Lake. And Mamette is like all of these French names. We've seen it as Mamite, I-T. I've seen it as Mammoth Lake as well. So they're the daughter. So there we go. After having established the Guichon Ranch at Chaperon Lake near Merritt, the brothers went their own way, each contributing in a major way to the development of the province. So Laurent opened a grand hotel, first of all, in New Westminster, the place to go to, which was he was able to replace after the conflagration that destroyed New Westminster in 1898. We had ours in 1886, right? A bit further away in the present city of Delta, or Landner, he established a large wharf. You can see on the right, great photo, a large wharf with a hotel, and it accommodated, there's a train on the wharf, the steamships, the sailboats, sail ships, and an industrial base. This is all on the South Fork of the Fraser River, and that community would become known by the name of Port Guichon. So if you go to the bird sanctuary in Landner, as you drive there, you come to an area where the street really narrows. Take a look at the street signs. It's Port Guichon still, and that is the dike that holds the water away from the fields of Port Guichon, right? So keeping in mind that one family, part of the family, the Guichon family, was in the interior raising livestock. These were farmers in Delta. They call themselves the meat potatoes and the meat Guichons and the potato Guichons, right? Which I think is great. Now, at their end, oh yes, and this is the original house of that family there, which served as a church as well for many years. For years, the double balcony was gone, and they have done an amazing job. They're extremely private. I have never managed to either interview them or get my foot into that door. Now, at their end, Joseph and Josephine established a superb Quilchena Inn hotel in the village of that name. Their eldest son, Lawrence Peter, established what would become the Guichon Cattle Company, which would become the largest ranch in the British Empire. Right? There he is on the left. His pasture management practices earned him the first honorary doctorate in agricultural sciences from UBC. Now, Gerard, one of his sons, posthumously received the Order of Canada, the right for his leadership in the establishment of cattle breeding associations. Now, the young man at the center is Guy Rose, one of the Guichon sons as well, grandsons, and he was my source there, and he was pretty much the last of the Guichons to speak French, so this was about 10 years ago, and he spoke to me in French, and then he passed away just about a year after I last spoke with them. Now, this same Gerard married Judith Ray, or EA of Quebec, an Anglophone, and the couple introduced a holistic method of ranching management in recognition for her personal accomplishments. Judith Guichon was named Lieutenant Governor of BC, a position she held from 2012 to 2018, and she was exceptional at it. So again, we're going to the top position in BC, and it all started with Francophone ranching in BC, right? Now, you will have noted that some of the families, here's the Miniberriets, who I met several times in their home on the reserve in Spence's Bridge. They could easily trace their Métis heritage. What is less evident is when these descendants were able to do so or felt compelled to assume their mixed ancestry. Now, these thus become new cultural strata with Francophone roots that our society is bound to include in its research, right? Our motto is a history that is still very much alive, and that is part of it, right? Now, in order to, and we have to properly reflect the Métis reality of the province's interior plateau, and indeed of the province. You should know that whenever we set up a kiosk at Francophone events, some Métis, mostly Anglophone, a few Francophone, approach us to assist them in researching their antecedents, because it is often not that evident to do so. We must recognize that the Métis of the Plains refuse to recognize as Métis the descendants of mixed European and First Nations heritage anywhere else in Canada, other than those among their own branches and descendants. And that's no more clear than has happened in the last month, where it seems they're going by the name the Plains Métis held a major conference with the Association of First Nations Chiefs in St. Boniface, and they called out Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, which have over the last decades, since the rebirth of Métis identity and pride and culture, they've called them out for having participated in identity theft by recognizing the Métis of their own provinces. So this is explosive. It's never been that tangibly expressed, and it made national news. So it remains a debate that will not be easily resolved. Now, until the smaller ranches were brought out and transformed into enormous operations, independent families such as the ones I've presented to you today cultivated their lands and raised their cattle. Francophones were among the first ranchers, and Indigenous women and men often became their spouses and workers. Even though the French language did not survive long in most of these exogamous couples or of mixed ancestry, French names persist throughout the landscape and in local lore. Some chose to mitigate their mixed origins over several generations, but assumed the richness of their diversity when social evolution encouraged them to do so. Some of these families shone by introducing new breeds of cattle and new plant cultivars, while other descendants seized other opportunities to succeed. Here we have Count Versepuech, right? And there's his wife Mutla, and they only had the one daughter, and take a look at her skin. It's very, very light. And of all things, he kept all his sons near him, and he sent his daughter to be educated in France. Unheard of. Really, even in European families, rarely did the daughter get selected for further education. Now, some of these people, these families, have lived impassioned lives, while others remain at the height of happiness when peacefully rocking on their ranch house's veranda. Thank you very much. So obviously there's a book that needs to be written now to add the ranchers that didn't make it into this. And this is, if I encourage you all to go online to visit the exhibition, you could just put in digital museums and Canada, and then just find us in the projects that are there. It's in French and in English. If and when you do, click on the photos, because every photo will open to a bit more information. All right.